The Frogs and the Ox. One hot summer day, a big, heavy ox came down to a pond to drink some water. It was a quiet day, and the frogs were having a wonderful time, hopping around, playing leapfrog, and splashing in the cool pond. They laughed and croaked happily, not expecting anything to disturb their fun. But when the ox stomped heavily into the pond, all the frogs jumped out of the way in fright, and one little frog got crushed into the muddy bottom without the ox even noticing. After a while, the old frog realized that the little frog was missing. She gathered all the other young frogs around her, her voice full of concern. "Has anyone seen little brother? Where could he be? What happened to him?" she asked worriedly. The young frogs looked at each other, their eyes wide. One of the small frogs, still trembling with fear, pointed toward the water and said, "A big, huge creature came down to the pond. It had giant feet, and it stepped on little brother with one of them." The old frog frowned, her face wrinkling in concern. "Big, you say? How big was this creature?" She puffed herself up, filling her lungs with air, trying to show how big she could be. "Was he as big as this?" she asked, puffing out her chest. The young frogs shook their heads quickly and shouted, "Oh, much bigger!" The old frog puffed herself up even more, looking very determined. She filled herself with more air and stretched out as far as she could. "He couldn't have been bigger than this," she said confidently. But the young frogs insisted, "No, Grandma, he was much, much bigger." The old frog was not willing to give up. She took in as much air as she could, puffing herself up larger than ever before. She wanted to prove that she could be just as big as this creature that had frightened her little ones. She puffed and puffed, her body growing larger and larger. The young frogs watched with wide eyes, some of them cheering her on, while others began to look worried. "Come on, Grandma, you can do it," one of them called, but another whispered, "Maybe she should stop." The old frog kept going, her body swelling more and more, until suddenly, with a loud pop, she burst. The sound echoed around the pond, and all the young frogs jumped back in shock. They stared at the spot where the old frog had been, realizing how dangerous it could be to try to be something you are not. They now understood that some creatures were just bigger than them, and it wasn't always possible or wise to try to match them. The young frogs gathered by the pond, feeling sad. One of them whispered, "Grandma tried so hard, but some things are just impossible." The other frogs nodded, their eyes downcast. They decided then and there that they would never again try to do something they knew was too risky. From that day on, the frogs continued to play happily in the pond, hopping and splashing as they always had. They sometimes talked about Grandma Frog and the lesson she taught them, knowing that it was best to appreciate who they were and not worry about trying to be something else. They knew it was okay to be small, and that their strength was in sticking together and helping each other. The moral is, don't try to do the impossible.